I still remember the sound, not of engines, not of gunfire, but of an idea snapping into place. It was louder than any explosion I'd ever heard. They called me reckless, said I was too old, too stubborn, too damn crazy to tinker with war machines. But I'd buried too many young men who never had a chance. Pilots flying tin birds against Japanese steel, and I swore I'd change that. That's when I started tearing apart the B-25 Mitchell. Not in a workshop, in a fever dream. I stripped out the bombardier's seat, pulled the nose open, and filled it with 8 50 caliber Brownings. 8 mouths of fire, 8 reasons for the enemy to fear us. Some said it wouldn't fly straight. Others said it wouldn't fly at all. But when I pressed that trigger for the first time and felt the plane shudder like a living beast, I knew we'd built something that could bite back. March 3rd, 1943, the day it all came together. The Japanese thought their ships were safe, hidden under layers of steel and arrogance. They didn't know we were coming. They didn't know the sky itself had learned to saw through steel. I looked out from my cockpit that morning, the sun glinting off the ocean like a sheet of glass. My crew waited in silence, every man ready, every heart pounding in rhythm with the engines. "All right, boys," I said, gripping the yoke tight. "Let's show them what an idea can do." Before the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, the Pacific had been a graveyard for ambition. Every time our boys went up, we came back missing someone. The Japanese convoys moved like ghosts, disciplined, protected, confident. Their destroyers were fast, their guns fierce, and their doctrine flawless. Every plan we had against them ended the same way: burning metal and empty sky. I couldn't stand it. I'd been a mechanic longer than I'd been a soldier, and somewhere deep down, I believed machines could be taught new tricks. When General Kenny gave me a chance, just a hangar, a few stripped-down Mitchells, and permission to tinker, I treated it like a prayer answered. In Australia, the airfields were rough, the heat unbearable, and the nights filled with the low hum of mosquitoes and worry. I'd lie awake, sketching designs under lantern light, the smell of oil and sweat thick in the air. I wasn't trying to build a weapon. I was trying to build a chance. We didn't have fancy tools or factory-grade precision, just men with steady hands, cutting torches, and guts. We ripped out everything unnecessary: bomb sights, armor plates, even co-pilot controls. Then we bolted in gun mounts, 4 on each side of the nose. It wasn't pretty. It was angry, loud, and off balance. But when we fired her up, she screamed like something alive. The first test flight nearly tore the wings off. The recoil was violent, shaking the frame like a storm, but the bullets hit where they were aimed. 8 streams of fury ripping through the air, straight, hard, unstoppable. That's when we knew we'd found our edge. Word spread fast. Pilots called it the flying buzzsaw. Mechanics called it madness. But to me, it was a promise. A way to turn fear into firepower. And soon, the Japanese would learn just how sharp that promise could be. March 2nd, 1943. The sun hung low over the Bismarck Sea, bleeding gold across the waves. Recon planes had spotted something big, a Japanese convoy, 8 transports and 8 destroyers heading for Lae. Nearly 7,000 troops, enough to turn the tide in New Guinea if they made landfall. General Kenny called me in that night. His eyes were sharp, voice calm, but the weight behind his words was clear. "Pappy, this is it. We can't let him through." Every man in the tent knew what that meant. The mission would be suicide for anyone flying too high or too slow. But this time, we had something new. Something built to tear through steel.
My modified B-25s were ready. I'd spent months pushing them to the edge, and now it was time to see if they could change the rules of war. We planned the strike like a dance. B-17s would fly high, dropping bombs from above to draw enemy fire. Then we'd come in low, wave top level, skimming the ocean so close the propellers would cut mist off the water. The Japanese gunners wouldn't see us until it was too late. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked along the runway, running my hand along the cold metal of my plane's nose. The gun barrels gleamed under the floodlights, 8 black eyes staring forward, hungry. I thought of the boys who died out there, the ones who'd fought with everything and still never stood a chance. Tomorrow, I'd make sure their ghosts weren't forgotten. As the first light crept over the horizon, engines began to roar. The air shook. Pilots climbed into their seats, faces pale but steady. My crew took their places, every man knowing what we were flying into. I slid into the cockpit, the leather seat groaning beneath me. My hands found the throttle. For a brief moment, I closed my eyes. All right, Pappy, time to see if you're a genius or just another fool with a wrench. The moment we hit open water, the world turned into thunder. The convoy stretched across the horizon, ships lined in formation, smoke curling from their stacks, sunlight glinting off steel hulls. Through the glass of my cockpit, they looked almost peaceful. Almost. Then, the flak started. Black clouds bloomed in the sky, bursts of fire chasing the B-17s above. Just as planned. The Japanese destroyers had their eyes fixed upward, firing everything they had at the decoy bombers. They never saw us coming. We dropped low, skimming the surface. The roar of the engines drowned out every thought, every doubt. My hands gripped the controls tight as we lined up on the first transport. The ship loomed larger and larger until it filled the window. "Guns hot," I said into the mic. 8 Brownings roared to life. The nose of the B-25 shuddered violently, tracer rounds screaming across the water. The ship's bridge exploded in a shower of steel and flame. I could see men diving overboard, tiny figures swallowed by the sea. It was chaos, beautiful and brutal all at once. The radio crackled with voices, pilots calling targets, screaming warnings, celebrating hits. But beneath the noise, a weight began to form in my chest. This wasn't just victory, it was slaughter. My invention had turned the air into a blade, slicing ships apart like paper. One of the transports erupted beside us, a fireball that shook the sky. The shockwave hit hard, tossing our bomber sideways. My co-pilot cursed, gripping the dash as alarms blared. We fought the turbulence, leveling out just in time to see another destroyer take a bomb through the deck. I wanted to feel proud, to believe we were saving lives, changing the tide. But all I could think about were the men down there, running, burning, dying beneath the weapon I'd built. The ocean below us was littered with oil, debris, and bodies. The smell of smoke seeped into the cockpit. I tried to push it down, to focus, to keep flying. But in that moment, as tracer rounds lit the dawn and the sea burned beneath us, I realized something no engineer wants to admit. Every invention, no matter how brilliant, demands a price. And today, I was the one paying it. The first wave had done its damage. Smoke pillars rising from the convoy, flames licking at the sky. But the fight wasn't over. Japanese destroyers turned outward, their decks alive with gunfire. Shells sliced the air, churning the sea into white fury. One lucky hit could erase everything we'd built. "Coming in again," I shouted into the radio, banking hard. My hands were steady now. Fear had burned itself out, replaced by something sharper, focus. We dove low, engines screaming. A destroyer loomed ahead, her guns swiveling toward us. I squeezed the trigger. The Brownings thundered, tracers ripping through the deck, cutting down gunners before they could fire. The ship shuddered under the onslaught, smoke and sparks spraying into the air. "Bombs away!" my bombardier yelled. A split second later, the skip bomb hit, bouncing once, twice, then slamming into the hull. The explosion tore the ship in half. The force hit us like a wall,
But when the smoke cleared, only wreckage remained. My heart pounded as we pulled up, barely clearing the mast of another transport. The sky was a mosaic of fire and chaos. Allied planes weaved through plumes of smoke, strafing, bombing, turning steel into dust. For the first time, the Japanese formation broke, ships scattering, commanders shouting orders that no one could follow. "Look at him run!" my gunner laughed, but his voice cracked with disbelief. I couldn't answer. I just watched. The unthinkable was happening. An entire Japanese convoy was crumbling beneath air power alone. No battleships, no torpedoes, just men and machines flying low enough to taste the salt of the sea. We'd changed the war in 15 minutes. The radio erupted with reports. Transports sinking, destroyers aflame, enemy aircraft nowhere to be seen. The sky belonged to us. But amid the triumph, my stomach twisted. I knew what this meant. There'd be no going back, no pretending this was just another tactic. We'd proven something the world would never forget, that airmen could erase fleets, that the ocean, once Japan's shield, had become its grave. As I looked down at the burning wrecks below, I whispered to myself, barely audible over the roar of the engines, "God help us. We've just made the sea bleed." By mid-morning, the sky was a furnace. Smoke boiled from the sea. Flames reflected in the cockpit glass like ghosts of the dead. I'd flown through storms, through hellfire, but never through something like this. The horizon was gone. Just smoke, water, and wreckage. The last destroyer turned hard to port, guns blazing. Its tracers whipped past my nose, white-hot lines slicing through the air. I jerked the yoke, barely missing a burst that shredded the tail of the bomber beside me. The radio was chaos, shouting, static, screaming engines. But through it all, I could hear one thing clearly, the voice of every man in my crew, steady, alive, refusing to break. We dove again. The B-25 howled, engines straining, nose guns lighting up the deck below. I could see Japanese sailors scrambling, their faces lit by the glow of burning oil. The Brownings hammered without mercy. The destroyer's bow erupted in sparks, then flame. The blast hit like a hammer. Shrapnel tore through the air, thudding against the fuselage. One piece punched through the window, slicing my cheek. I didn't flinch. "Keep firing," I yelled. "Don't stop." The guns screamed, the recoil shaking the frame like it would tear apart. My vision blurred, my arms ached, but I held the trigger down until the barrels glowed red. The destroyer split in two, a roar swallowing the sea. I pulled up hard, the G-force crushing me into the seat. For a second I thought the wings would snap, but the old Mitchell held together, battered and defiant. All around us ships were dying. Explosions rolled like thunder, each one brighter than the last. B-fighters strafed from the east. B-17s dropped fire from above, and our B-25s carved through what was left. 15 minutes. That's all it took. 15 minutes to erase a fleet that had believed itself untouchable. As we climbed higher, I looked down through the haze. The sea was no longer blue. It was black, thick with smoke and oil. Thousands of men fought in the water below, their cries lost to the roar of the engines. I'd built a weapon to save our boys, and in doing so, had built something that could unmake an army. My co-pilot broke the silence. "That's it, Pappy. They're gone." I nodded, unable to speak. My hands trembled on the controls. For the first time that day, I let myself breathe. We'd done it. The Japanese convoy was gone, sunk to the last ship. But as the sun rose higher and the smoke began to fade, I couldn't escape the thought echoing in my head, "God forgive me. We've just changed war forever." When we returned to base, the silence was almost unbearable. The engines coughed to a stop, the propellers slowed, and for a moment, no one moved. My crew sat still, faces streaked with sweat and smoke, staring at nothing. We'd won, but none of us felt victorious. The airfield was a graveyard of noise,
Mechanics running, medics shouting, and somewhere in the distance, the low hum of engines from planes still returning. I climbed out of the cockpit, boots hitting the tarmac hard, knees shaking. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I'd seen destruction before, but never like this. General Kenny was waiting. He didn't speak at first, just nodded, eyes locked on the smoke trails still rising from the horizon. Then he said quietly, "You did it, Pappy. You proved it works." I wanted to feel proud. I really did. But all I could see were the faces of the men we'd just burned out of the sea. The water had swallowed them, thousands of them. And for what? To prove an idea could kill faster than fear itself? The reports started flooding in within hours. 8 transports gone, 4 destroyers sunk, 6,000 men lost. The Japanese convoy? Erased. The radio operators called it a miracle. The strategists called it a turning point. I called it something else. I walked to the hangar that night and ran my hand along the nose of my B-25. The gun barrels were still warm, the metal scarred and blackened. I thought about the men who built her, mechanics who'd worked until their fingers bled, believing they were saving lives. Maybe we did, but we also changed everything. War wasn't about ships and armies anymore. It was about ideas, fast, brutal, and merciless. And mine had just rewritten the rule book. I looked out toward the dark sky, where the horizon still glowed faintly with the fires of the Bismarck Sea. You did your job, old girl. Now let's hope the world can live with what we've done. When the last echo of gunfire faded over the Bismarck Sea, I stood in silence, surrounded by the smell of salt and burning fuel. The sky was still streaked with smoke, ghosts of ships that once carried thousands. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was the weight of what we'd done. We'd built something monstrous and magnificent. 8 guns packed into the nose of a bomber, a flying blade slicing through steel and sea alike. I'd spent months perfecting that design, believing it would save lives, end battles faster, bring men home, and it did. But every shot fired carved its own scar on the world, and on me. They called me a genius, said I'd changed air warfare forever. But I knew better. The real change wasn't in the skies. It was in the souls of the men who flew through them. Once we built machines to protect. Now we were building them to dominate. A few weeks later, in a quiet briefing room, the generals talked of the future. More guns, they said. More firepower. More speed. The machine I had built was no longer mine. It had become an idea, one too powerful to stop. That night I walked alone to the hangar. The B-25 sat under the floodlights. Her skin burned, her wings scarred, her guns still warm. I reached out and ran my hand along her frame. She felt alive, like a creature that had done what it was born to do, yet didn't understand why. I whispered, "You did your job. Now it's our turn to remember why we built you." Out over the horizon, faint orange light still flickered where the Japanese convoy had vanished beneath the waves. That glow wasn't victory. It was a warning, because on that day, amid the wreckage of the Bismarck Sea, we hadn't just changed the course of war, we had changed the nature of man himself.